Truly in life, you reap what you sow. And in this case, the producers of Netflix's The Witcher have been reaping nothing but bad news for almost a year now. First came the disastrous news that Henry Cavill, by far the most popular element of the show, had decided to part ways with them over creative differences. Then the embarrassing failure of showrunner Lauren Hissrich's dream project, Witcher Blood Origins, which basically united the entire fanbase in absolute mockery. Then there were the cratering ratings for Season 3, which came and went with all the impact of a left hook from Warwick Davis. And finally, it all culminated in the recent news that the entire show has now been put on hold indefinitely due to the strikes in Hollywood and might never return at all. Oh no. Anyway, last week, now, I have to admit, my first thought when hearing this news was, what I meant to say was, well, we tried to warn you. If Lauren Hissrich and her terrible chums are currently reaping nothing but failure and embarrassment, then the seeds of this calamity were actually sown years earlier with a series of creative decisions that basically guaranteed its doom. And if nothing else, well, perhaps we can turn this debacle into a learning experience on how not to launch a fantasy show. So join the drinker as I count down the top 5 terrible decisions that sealed The Witcher's fate. Number 1. The world building. One of my biggest criticisms of the first 2 seasons was their complete failure to establish a believable, well-defined world with understandable factions, geography and culture. Just like in my reviews, I'll direct your attention to Game of Thrones, which was basically a masterclass in quickly and efficiently setting up a fantasy world that felt believable and lived in. Within just a few short episodes, you understood exactly who the main factions were and what they wanted, where they were based, what the geography of Westeros looked like, and roughly how long it took to get from one location to another. And most importantly, it stayed consistent. Well, at least until the final couple of seasons when everyone unlocked fast travel. In the world of The Witcher though, everything just feels like it's been thrown together higgledy-piggledy into generic fantasy land with no definable geography, architecture or climate. It makes no attempt to explain where cities and nation-states sit in relation to each other or even what the overall layout of the world actually is. If a character has to get from Vizima to Novigrad, I don't know if that's going to take a day or a month because the show doesn't seem to know either. The fact that Season 1 decided to tell its whole story non-chronologically, bouncing backwards and forwards by decades to tell important events from different perspectives only compounded the problem. And when your audience starts to lose track of what's actually happening, where and why, it's pretty difficult to keep them invested in your show. And the thing is, some of these problems of geography and culture could have been mitigated if it wasn't for 2. The casting. The casting director for The Witcher, Sophia Holland, recently spoke about her thought process for casting shows like this. Quote, "When you think about people's unconscious bias, especially in a fantasy world, it felt like these worlds were predominantly white. And I remember saying, I feel like we need to challenge what people think of as the standard of beauty." In other words, her overriding priority with the casting of The Witcher was to push her own personal political agenda rather than casting actors that were consistent with the time and location where they appear. Don't get me wrong, giving a diverse range of actors more opportunities on screen is no bad thing. But I just don't think a fictional Northern European fantasy setting is the right place to do it. Again, take a look at Game of Thrones for a moment and consider how every location has its own distinctive architecture, climate, landscape and people so that you could usually tell at a glance exactly where you were. The average settlement in Dorne looked very different from Essos or King's Landing or the Iron Islands or the North, and the people in those places reflected that difference. In The Witcher, your average shithole village in the middle of nowhere has got a more diverse population than central London, and it looks just as ridiculous and unbelievable as it sounds. It takes you straight out of the experience because instead of a grounded and believable fictional world, you feel like you're watching a primer for an HR seminar. Number 3. Not enough Witcher now. You might think that a show called The Witcher would be focused primarily on The Witcher. But apparently Lauren and her writing team had other ideas. Yennefer was without doubt the narrative focus of Season 1. While Season 2 was all about Ciri learning to harness her powers, and as far as I understand it, Season 3 is about the two of them working together to girl boss their way out of every situation. Which leaves Geralt kind of sidelined a lot of the time, either playing babysitter or being sent off on random side quests just to keep him occupied. And you know, I could never quite escape the feeling that the showrunners kind of resented his very presence. A feeling which turned out to be more accurate than even I could have predicted. Which brings me neatly along to number 4. Losing Henry Cavill. I'm just gonna say it. Henry Cavill is quite possibly one of the most popular actors in Hollywood right now. Likeable and down-to-earth and a universally positive casting choice to play Geralt, bringing some much-needed star power to the show. Unfortunately for the Witcher writers, he's also a massive nerd and a huge fan of the books and games, which is why he signed up for the show in the first place. In other words, he knows his stuff when it comes to the lore and characters, and you're not gonna be able to bullshit your way out of conversations with him, and he's not shy about speaking up about it. I mean, damn man, he already did his best to warn us about what was coming. With the shift of the showrunner's vision where it's an ensemble cast more so than a singular lead, and the perspectives is shifted to be almost more of a Cirilla Yenfer perspective. And so it's about finding my character's place within that vision and making sure that I do everything I can to be as faithful to the source material as possible within the structure set out for me. In other words, I've basically become a side character in my own show, but I'm gonna do my best to try and make it work somehow. Naturally, this kind of free-thinking attitude didn't go down well with Lauren and her team, who made no effort to hide their absolute disdain for the source material, according to former Witcher writer Beau Demio. The obvious result was that Henry and the writers began to butt heads over the direction, and fair play to the guy for managing to hang in there for 3 seasons and somehow stay professional. Because I sure as shit wouldn't have. But in the end, it all became too much, and in October of last year, Henry announced that he was leaving the show after the 3rd season. Literally the only big star on the roster. The only man fighting to maintain some semblance of accuracy to the source material, and the only reason that most fans had to keep watching, had been pushed out the door by a group of narcissistic, self-absorbed morons high on the smell of their own farts. And honestly, I don't blame them for bailing out of a sinking ship, especially considering what was on the horizon. 5. Blood Origins. If fans were divided over the merits of The Witcher, then one thing they could absolutely agree on was that Blood Origins was a steaming pile of monkey shit that never should have seen the light of day. Honestly, this fucking amateur hour disaster did so much damage to the Witcher brand, absolutely tarnishing what was left of its reputation. And what's interesting is that it's actually a pretty good insight into what the Witcher writers are capable of when they don't have all that pesky lore and source material holding back their creativity? Is that the word I'm looking for? Make no mistake, Blood Origins is very much the Witcher story they always wanted to tell. A story where diversity and inclusion, female empowerment and LGBT representation were the overriding priorities, and telling an actual good story that complemented source material was a distant afterthought. The upshot of all this bullshit is where we find ourselves right now, with a season 3 that almost nobody bothered to watch, a star that's now checked out of the production, a failed prequel series, and a massive question mark over the very future of the show. And you know what? I've got absolutely no sympathy for them, because the only people they have to blame for this are themselves. You guys had an open goal on this one, and you absolutely fumbled it.
The prequel failed.
You fumbled it because you didn't respect the source material.
Flopped.
You know, the thing that got you this show in the first place. You didn't respect the main star, who could have been your biggest ally, but ended up becoming your biggest detractor because you refused to listen to him. And you didn't respect the fans, the people you needed to win over, and instead chose to mock and belittle them. And why did you do all of these things? You thought you knew better than everyone else around you. You thought you could swagger into this IP that people have cherished for decades and reshape it in your own image. And when you got pushed back on it, you threw a hissy fit and lashed out at the very people that were trying to help you. Well, if life has taught me anything, it's that you get what you fucking deserve. And you guys deserve to see this show fail. And I for one certainly won't be shedding any tears for you. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.